Hello and welcome to my session, Notes from the Field Microsoft Information Protection. I'm Thomas Kurth. I'm working in Switzerland as a workplace consultant. I'm focused on the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suite, and most of my projects are around Configuration Manager, Intune, Information Protection, and also the Threat Protection Suite. I'm working at baseVISION. I have a blog, vpninjas.ch, where I share all my knowledge. My life is nearly all around technology. I'm a certified ethical hacker, Microsoft MVP, and have various Microsoft certifications. Here, everybody, lifelong learning is really something which we should take care of. My hobbies, when I'm not working in technology, is playing hockey with the old skates and also some smaller coding projects. You can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn or send me a mail if you have any questions regarding the session. I will also be available in the Discord, so on the Discord server after the session if you have some questions. The session today will be all around information protection. Also, I will also cover areas around data loss prevention, and I will try to give you insights about real-life projects. We always see that people are talking about classification and have opinions which do not really work in the real life. I try to really give you here notes from my projects. I will also show you how we can integrate the solutions in our environments, and also provide a short roadmap which highlights the most important steps. At the end, we will have time for questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, just leave a comment and I will pick it up at the end, or if I see it also during the session. Why is information protection important? The most important thing is 10 years, 20 years ago, we had our company environment, we had a firewall, we had a network, we had our PCs, everything was in one network, we were protected. Nobody had the pain that data could be lost because I am using bring your own device and things like that. At some point, mainly the senior management has added iPads and iOS devices to their environment. They sync their mails, and then the whole journey started where complexity dramatically has risen. The second point was then when all the cloud journey started in environments. Various cloud solutions were added in all companies. And at the first point, nobody has thought about security. Then more and more bring your own device strategies. Also now in the last year, we saw all the companies switch to work from home scenarios where users worked with their private devices. So we as a company do no longer have control over the whole device. So how do we work with that? Then also a major addition is the whole IoT world, that are, again, devices which can be everywhere and could have important data of our environment. Then we also extend to our data centers to infrastructure as a service providers or platform as a service providers like Azure or Amazon. So that means for us, our new modern enterprise network is no longer limited by our own network. It's limited by nearly nothing. And how can we provide here a secure perimeter that our data is still protected? I have here often discussions with customers which are using traditional methods, like we use always force tunneling in a VPN solution on our devices. So we route all traffic through our internal network. So bring your own devices, have a VPN installed, and as soon they are connected, they are always forced to go through the company network. Also, IoT devices are bound to specific IP ranges and things like that. But all of that makes it just more and more complex, and it does not open my company to work with other partners. They add tenant restrictions to their infrastructure so that their employees can no longer work with another company. They can only sign on to their own tenant. Is that now the goal of a modern cloud solution like Microsoft 365? I think not. So in the last few years, Microsoft did big changes in this area. Microsoft has invited the universal labeling term. Before, if we go a little bit back, we had Right Management Service, which was Azure RMS, which gave me the capability to protect single files. Then that was improved to Azure Information Protection, where I had then, for example, things like I can show you here in my PowerPoint. It's here labeling, which was added with Azure Information Protection. And that's already great because I can label and protect single files. But then more and more solutions of Microsoft added also labeling terms. We have records management, data loss prevention, and then the information protection, which I talked before. So all of them had their own labels. And with universal labeling, Microsoft announced that they will converge all these labels together. But what does that really mean? What has changed in the past 2 years? If I have a look on all the solutions which Microsoft has, I have to say not much, because what has changed is the labels from Azure Information Protection are now in the M365 admin portal. That's one change which is already okay. And we have private previews to be able to use these labels also, for example, for records management. So the labeling, where we came from, is still not really universal. Some parts are in public preview, but yeah, it's not really universal labeling. So this slide will show you what is today available. And one thing is important. We have a data classification layer. That's not the labeling which you saw before. Data classification is a possibility to define sensitivity information types. That could be regex patterns or Microsoft provided patterns to detect specific content type. For example, credit card numbers, banking numbers, personal social numbers, things like that. We have also a possibility trainable classifiers, which scans my information, all my documents which I have in my environment, and provides me the possibility to train my Microsoft systems to detect specific classifications. Then a third thing, which I was also not aware until a short time ago, is exact data match. I have even now the possibility to create a database or use my existing customer database, connect it to the Microsoft classification system, and, for example, automatically detect documents which contains customer numbers or names of customers. And that's really, really great. With this data classification, or because this data classification I can use in the boxes which you see above. We have one, I start on the right side, it's information protection. Information protection allows me to classify single documents and to apply encryption or a document mark. I can extend, for example, header and footer, and I can do that automatically based on the things we define in the data classification layer. We can also do it manually, as I showed it before in PowerPoint. But here we see we can use the data classification. The next thing is in the middle is data loss prevention. Data loss prevention has the idea to detect where my users probably are sharing documents or mails with people which they shouldn't. It mainly gives users a notification, for example, in Outlook. It can also create an incident report to an administrator if, for example, one user is sharing hundreds of documents externally. And again, this data loss prevention can be applied automatically based on the data classification types I have below, mainly at the moment based on the sensitivity information types. On the left side, we have records management. Records management helps us to fulfill legal and business requirements regarding retention, but also automatically delete files. For example, with GDPR, I should remove customer data as soon as I do no longer require them. That means, for example, I can have a customer workspace with all files of my customers, and as soon they are not modified, for example, 1 year ago, then I can automatically delete them. That are things which I can do, or for example, financial documents need to be retained for 10 years here in Switzerland. Here I can define a retention policy, for example, on the finance SharePoint side, or I can also do that based, again, on the data classification which we have below, based on the sensitivity info types, trainable classifiers. So I can, for example, say, okay, everywhere where I have a credit card number or a banking number, I will retain these documents for 10 years. So even a user, when he is deleting something, a file, it stays hidden for the user, still there. So I can search for it. I can also recover the document. I also saw some customers which used records management as a backup solution. I know that's definitely not a backup solution, but it gives me the option to really retain all documents so that nobody can modify or delete the document. So that are the 3 main pillars, and all of them are based on the data classification layer. I will just show you that here in an example, how that looks like in the admin interface. I'm here in a demo environment and I'm in the compliance center. I will make it a little bit bigger for you. We have here the data classification. That's the box which I had at the bottom. Here I can define these trainable classifiers, sensitivity information types. I can open it here, and you see here we have already plenty of definitions available. Austria here already, identity card detection, but we can also create our own. And if we do that, we can here, for example, say Swiss social ID. Define here a name and a description, and then I can start defining here patterns. I can define primary elements which need to be available. I can define also how near the characters or the single elements should be together. So for example, if I say, okay, if there is a if there is credit card name like MasterCard and then a number like that, then we have a high confidence. If it's just a number with the same pattern of a credit card, then it's a low confidence. I can define things like that. And it's much better than it was years ago, where we just could create regex patterns. So that's really cool what we can do here. And if I with this wizard here, you see here also the exact data matches. Here I can provide a database schema. If I do that, then I can detect my documents based on the content of this database. So that's the data classification. And then where do I find records management, data loss prevention, and information protection? It's not shown directly. We have to click on show all. And then we see all this information. You have then data loss prevention, information protection, and records management. If I open here data loss prevention, you see we can here create a new policy. We can also apply it to different locations. And you see here, I can choose from the existing sensitivity information types, which we saw before. So all of them are based on the data classification. So what Microsoft did in the last years was not really create or has mainly moved the labeling from information protection to Microsoft 365, but it's not really that these labels are universal yet, but they built the whole classification layer, which is now the foundation for all three pillars. And that's already really, really great. So we now talked mostly about what is available. I would also highlight a little bit about the architecture, because the labeling is just one part. If I have a document labeled, for example, as a top secret document, that can encrypt the document, but probably I would like to do a little bit more. I would like to deny sharing on these files. Then I need, for example, cloud app security for that. Or I would like to analyze it. Then I need log analytics. Or I would like to protect access to it. Then I came to the part of conditional access. And you see, it's really complex how all these solutions work together. But as soon you have this solution, it's really cool what solutions you can build. There is one thing which I really would like to mention, that's here the endpoint DLP part. That's something which is really new. I also tried to show you that. It's based on the engine of Defender for Endpoint. In the public preview, it has changed that Endpoint DLP does no longer require Defender for Endpoint. So you don't have to enroll to Defender for Endpoint to be able to use it. Now I will share that. That's here, the Endpoint DLP settings. Here you see we have possibilities to define apps where the user can open company documents. We can define if he is allowed to use specific Bluetooth apps. We can even restrict to upload files to specific browsers or to specific domains. And that's something which is really powerful. If you think about the use case or about the companies which traditionally use the forced tunneling to be under control of all uploads via their proxy solution. Here we can do that directly on the endpoints. And I think that's something which is really, really cool and helpful for the future. So keep an eye on what Endpoint DLP brings in the future. Go back to the presentation. So what are the use cases which I see, which my customers most often have? My customers have requirements like, oh, I have some information which is now public available, and I don't know who has shared that. That's, for example, a question which I got from one customer. Another customer had the question or the problem that he really had to find a solution that nobody, or if somebody copies a file to a USB stick, that it is also protected there. That was the reason was because he had before a solution which was really protecting or closed all USB ports, and he would like to go away from that. So he has started to using the Microsoft solution for that. Another thing is, for example, the finance department, which sees, oh, we have changed on our SharePoint site, but we don't know who changed that. So also who did what and also from where. So that are use cases which I traditionally see. So what should we do today? First of all, we should analyze our license situation. That's the most important thing. If you don't have the license, we have first to talk also about the licensing. I assume that all of you have an EMS E3 license, which have at least Azure Information Protection license. If not, then that's your first goal. If you would like to do advanced things, then you also have to think about all the compliance solutions which are part of the E5 plan. Then the first thing should be using the low-hanging fruits. Low-hanging fruits is using Azure AD conditional access. I mean, everybody tells to do that, but still many customers doesn't have enabled MFA for accessing their environments. The second thing is protect information. We can, with Azure Information Protection, really start small with a few labels. I will give you also some hints how your labeling structure can look like later on in the presentation. But we can really enable it because it's already an additional benefit if some users are protecting some specific documents. If you just hang around and say, oh no, classification, labeling, it's too complex, we don't publish something, then yeah, nothing will change. But if we publish and give the users options to use and label some documents, then they will start using it. Then the advanced implementation is then really monitoring the usage, start automatic labeling and classification of documents, and also start trying to detect breaches. As soon as you have that, you should constantly review your infrastructure. That's then the main thing, maintenance process. Also labeling, you always have to think about, are my labels still valid for my current business situation? For example, we at baseVISION, we created the first set of labels 3 or 4 years ago with the first release of RMS. Then 2 years ago, we changed that because we had some learnings of how our users were working with the labels. So we could improve the labeling terminology. And now we are thinking again, can we still improve it? So that's a continuous process then. What is Microsoft Information Protection? At the end, it's one thing, the label is a file property. It's traveling with the file. It's really built in the file you label. It could be that if you label a document, for example, with your internal label, you send it to another company, they open it, they have not the same label structure like you. I mean here not the naming, so it's not labeled in their company, but they can again apply a label to the document. What they cannot do is apply another right management template if you already have added something like encryption or block users from editing documents or restrict copy paste. So another company cannot override the permission you gave on the file, but they can add a different label because the label has always a specific ID, and there could be multiple such IDs present in a document header. So that's something which could have which is important to know. A label can enforce encryption or add restrictions to the document, but hasn't to. So we can, but we don't have to do it. A label can also trigger other solutions. As you saw before in the architecture diagram, we have the possibility to use these labels also in other environments. For example, cloud app security can be triggered directly because I have applied a specific label to a document. Also, something which is important to know is that most often just a few documents in a company are really confidential or high confidential. We speak here about 1, 2, 3% of the documents which really should be considered as confidential. Is the salary confidential? Yeah, probably, but still everybody can talk about it. The company shouldn't talk about it, but the employee can talk about it. So is it now confidential? That are questions you always have to ask. So the solution which we build here is mainly focused on a few % of your data. A few years ago, we started with the following recommendation. I think it's still a good recommendation, but it's not the best. I will explain you why. We started always with a label like personal or public, which is then we don't care about it. We probably have log monitoring. We know where this data is, but we don't care. Then we have an internal label. That's mainly our default label, which we add to all documents. And we have not applied any restriction on this type of document. Then we have confidential. Confidential means for us, okay, it's internal, but we do not have any other restrictions internally. We also have probably against external just access for people which are onboarded to our tenants, so not to everybody. So we can apply such restrictions or, for example, block sharing based on cloud app security. And then we have the high confidential. Here we created several sub-labels. One is all employees. If this one will be applied, only employees have access to this document. Then a management board, only the management board has access. And then you could think about creating labels for specific departments. But here is the bad thing about this terminology. As soon as a user has, for example, a document which is in his eye confidential, probably it has also confidential information, but he has to work with an external consultancy company, or he has to work with somebody else, or it's a document which they share with a partner. They can never mark it as confidential, because as soon as it's confidential, it's already, for internal, it's not restricted, but probably for external, it's restricted. They can also not mark it as highly confidential. So it ends up that also the document is confidential, but they mark it as internal because the restrictions which were applied do not really match the use case which they have. Also here internally with the high confidential, if you create here a label per department, brings some risks, because our departments are not working always inside of their department, they work together with other departments. So if one department has a new document, they only work on this document and they say nobody else should know it. But then they would like to talk with the finance department, for example, about the business plan. Oh, no, not possible. You have to change to all employees. So with these restrictions, we are really forced to lower the labeling because the restrictions the IT has applied is not as it should be for the specific use case. So I have a better solution. It has one or two bigger changes. It's mainly here, if you see, we have always a sub-label which is no restriction. Then we have an internal. No restriction means really we have no restriction. We still can create, for example, a cloud app security rule to, for example, alert as soon confidential files are shared on a high volume. We can add a better monitoring to these confidential documents. We can provide, for example, an internal label, which then restricts just for internal use. And we can also provide a custom label. So the end user is able, if he selects that one, to have a confidential file, but he can define custom permissions. So he can say, okay, but partner X with this email address should be able to read it. So he can dynamically assign permissions. With that, we have no longer the problem that users are marking a confidential document as internal because they need to share it externally. So that here is really important. I think the labeling structure should be really clear. It should be open because we already had here much better option than what we had before. Because without an information protection solution like Microsoft Information Protection, we have no protection. If we add that, we gave the users the possibility to use it. And so I think that's really good if you start small with just a few labels. Don't create department labels. Don't create management labels. If they need it, they can use custom labels. Then how does that look like for the end user? One thing is, if we are using the unified labeling client for information protection, we have two options. The one is Office has a built-in capability to label documents. We have also an add-on, an add-in which we can deploy. The add-in provides much more capabilities than the Office built-in. But the Office built-in, the cool thing is we have the labeling also on the web. The unified labeling client is just available on Windows. But it looks really the same, but has some possibilities more. So if you start a project, think about if you would like to deploy the unified labeling client to the Windows device. I think it's still really beneficial if you can use this specific functionality on your main devices, but still have the possibility to open the documents everywhere and to apply the basic labeling functionality everywhere on the web, on the iPad, on macOS. As soon we have the solution implemented, then the first thing is monitoring, because we need to know if the solution is used and how is it used. You see, for example, here in this window on the right side, you see top sensitivity labels applied to content. We see here in this environment, we have over 5,000 labels applied with the internal, just 42 with high confidential, 40 with personal, 38 with public, and 16 with confidential. So you see, we just cover a few documents, but there we could apply a protection mechanism for. We also see here on the left side a good overview about the sensitivity info types Microsoft found in the environment. So for example, I saw here, that was our baseVISION infrastructure, which you see here. We saw here, okay, we have many documents with banking account numbers. But I see here I have nearly 30 or 40% of banking number documents, but nothing marked as confidential. And that helps me then to probably adjust or also to educate specific end users, train them that they are able and they start labeling the documents. Or I can create automatic labeling then based on such reportings. In my session description, I also write about Log Analytics from Azure. Log Analytics is deprecated. It's still marked as preview in the Azure portal, but because the Azure portal for information protection is depreciating, so Log Analytics is no longer a solution because everything is now built in here in the compliance center. But you see here, everything on one single dashboard, and that's already really cool. You see here a second screenshot also from our environment. The cool thing here is you see directly also actions which were done on the endpoints. So you see here in the Activity Explorer, activities which were done on my end devices. This information is based on Defender for Endpoint or Endpoint DLP. Again, one of them you need to enable. We see here also things on Exchange. For example, here that was 2 times the same email. Here the label was applied on the endpoint, and also Exchange has reported the same event back. Because of that, also it's here the same time frame. The cool thing here, what you see really is file copied to cloud, file copied to clipboard. So we have here really deep insights if somebody is trying to steal documents. So for data loss prevention capabilities, we have here really cool insight about what's going on in our infrastructure. We can create monitoring alerts based on this information too. Something which was just available in the old portal, not in the new one, is recommendations. Still, if you have configured the Log Analytics workspace, then you still get these recommendations, and I assume that these recommendations will also be moved to the Microsoft 365 compliance portal. Here, the good thing was, I, for example, saw that I had files on one specific notebook which had a lot of banking account numbers. And then I can create automatically an auto classification rule so that it, for example, applies automatically the confidential label to this document or recommend. So I have here 2 options, recommend or do it automatically. And I think especially these recommendations can give me some insights if I'm not really familiar with the reports and if I don't have ideas how I could improve the whole labeling landscape, then I have the recommendations which help here. Important is here, you need EMS E5 or Azure Information Protection P2 plan or M365 E5 compliance, all of them, or one of them is at least required. What can we do with the labels? For example, in Outlook, we can add justifications. For example, if I have a document which is marked as internal and I send it via mail and it's an external email address, then Outlook can give me an pop-up where I can fill out more information why I am doing that. I can monitor the labels with Cloud App Security. I can even apply sensitivity labels to whole Microsoft Teams or Office 365 groups. Then I have some other actions. I will show you that a little bit later. I can even open or label my documents in the web apps. And I can also use that for Windows Information Protection. I don't know if somebody of you has used Windows Information Protection already. That's a component on Windows operating system which helps me to classify specific applications and data sources as company data sources, and then the operating system is only allowing access to the specific applications. Outlook justifications, here is an example. I have one option is if I add a specific confidential document, then you see here the justification pop-up which comes up. I have also the possibility that, for example, I added here a confidential document, that I then add automatically the confidential label also to the email. So the email has always the same label as attached documents. That hasn't to be, but can be defined. That's something which is only possible if I use the add-in. With the built-in labeling possibility, I don't have these justifications and auto-labeling capabilities. But still, if I attach a confidential document, the confidential document is encrypted. I send that to a customer, that's still working. They cannot access because it's encrypted. So it's more than that the email probably also contains sensitive information. What can I do with Cloud App Security? With Cloud App Security, I will just show you that. With Cloud App Security, I can create a policy to detect data leakage. For example, I can define a file policy with public. I can define here a filter, the classification label, which you see here. I can say, okay, if it's Azure Information Protection label, which is high confidential and the access level is public, then please on OneDrive, remove the sharing link, make it again private. Please notify me as a CISO, for example. I can do the same on SharePoint, and that gives me a great flexibility because I can say, okay, I don't encrypt all confidential files, but I can prohibit the sharing, for example, the external sharing. I can also detect high volume sharings. So if, for example, I have shared hundreds of confidential files, and I can create automatically alerts, or again, prevent the external sharing. So that's the integration with Cloud App Security, which I have. With Office 365, I have the possibility that's not per default available. You can enable this possibility to have the sensitivity label here on an Office 365 group. Important is here, if you have a specific management system to create your groups, to automatically provision Azure AD groups or Teams accounts, governance solutions, then check that they also support these sensitivity labels. On a SharePoint side, what's not happening, if I, for example, say the SharePoint side or the team side is confidential, it will not per se mark all files as confidential. That's something which is not happening today. It's more the possibility to add restrictions on the access to these team sites. I can show you that. I can create here a label. No. I have to do that here. Sorry. That's the labels. Create label. Test teams. Test teams. So then next scope, you see here files email, that's the normal thing. Group sites, that's what I would like to show you now. The other thing is here Azure Purview, which is something new. With that, I can apply classification now newly also to SQL columns, Azure Blob Storage, and much more. So just preview, but with that, you can really also classify data on the infrastructure or PaaS level. Files, emails, I have no options then, but you see here now for the groups and sites, I have to define privacy and external user access. That means if a team site is now labeled with this label, then we can restrict access, for example, to this team site. For example, here, privacy, we can define, okay, it's private. Nobody else can, or only team owners can add members to this group. We can then also allow here allow group owners to allow external access. And here we can further limit, for example, that unmanaged devices can only use the web-only access. And that's something really cool. If I can say, okay, from my internal devices, I can just use it, but from unmanaged device, bring your own devices, we have just the web version. That's something which is really cool. Office web apps, we saw on web apps, we can apply labels, but it's really restricted currently. So applying a label, it's applying also the encryption, all these things, but it's doing what it's doing, but we have no justifications, for example. With Windows Information Protection and Defender ATP together and Microsoft Information Protection, we have also the possibility to detect the files which are on endpoints. We saw that before on the Activity Explorer, and that gives us also insights in Defender ATP or Defender for Endpoint. And I can then apply a specific data sensitivity label to a device. So for example, here on this device, we have high confidential documents. And that can help me, again, if I have security issues. If I have an alert in Defender for Endpoint, I can prioritize machines which have highly confidential documents. So you can see it's one simple toggle in Endpoint, in Defender for Endpoint, and then you have this information. I hope you saw many things during these sessions, which you probably were not aware of. I hope also you saw how you can start. Here again, my tip is really start small, use the labels, which I have shown in the second example. Start simple. That's the most important thing, and start early. You don't have to train each and every user, publish the labels, and I really can guarantee the users are start using the solution on their own. If you have any questions, I will be in the Discord channel after the session. Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions to you. Otherwise, just leave a comment here. I will answer them later on also on YouTube. I thank you, and I hope we will see you soon physically at an event. Thank you.